The silent radio. In a small American town during the roaring 1920s, the Summers family had finally purchased a radio, a sleek wooden box that promised music, news, and the novelty of voices coming from nowhere. For the first few days, it delivered as expected: jazz tunes, announcers reading news of distant cities, advertisements for miracle cures and household gadgets. Yet one evening, as dusk settled over the wooden clapboard houses, the radio crackled, its static lingering longer than usual, a deep, uneasy hum that seemed to fill the entire living room. Mr. Summers, adjusting the dial, frowned. The music had stopped, replaced by a whispering tone, uneven, like the murmur of someone speaking far away and close at once. Mrs. Summers glanced up from her sewing, her hands trembling slightly. "Did you hear that, Harold?" she asked. He shook his head, attempting to dismiss it as interference, but even as he turned the dial, the voice became clearer, low, and unmistakably human. It was a woman's voice, distant yet piercing, whispering a single name: Eleanor. Their daughter, sitting cross-legged on the floor, froze. Her name was Eleanor. The room seemed to grow colder, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls, and the familiar scent of lavender from the curtains turned faintly acrid, like burned fabric. At first, Mr. Summers rationalized it. Perhaps the radio station was broadcasting some dramatic reading, a story or a play. But then came another name, whispered in the same chilling tone: Harold, his own name. The hairs on his neck stood rigid. He reached for the volume knob, twisting it to silence the box, but the whisper persisted, somehow seeping from the very wood, vibrating the floorboards beneath his feet. The shadows deepened, and in the reflection of the glass-fronted radio, he thought he saw shapes, indistinct, writhing, shifting, but when he blinked, the room appeared normal again. The family exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Summers attempted a laugh, though it lacked warmth. "It's probably just a technical glitch," he murmured, but even as he spoke, the radio hissed again, clearer this time, pronouncing a third name with deliberate clarity: Martha Summers. The mother, pale and stiff, clutched the sewing, her fingers tightening around the needle. The realization struck them simultaneously. The radio was naming them. Not in jest, not by accident. Their own names, whispered with a cadence that made each syllable resonate in the chest, as though the very voice had been waiting, listening for them. The room seemed to contract. The lamp on the side table flickered, throwing shadows that merged with the corners of the room. The radio, silent a moment ago, now pulsed, faintly at first, then louder, until the murmured names became urgent, accusatory, inescapable. The living room was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a chamber in which some unseen force was cataloguing them, marking them, claiming their attention with inevitability. Eleanor clutched her mother's arm, wide-eyed and trembling. Her father, sweating, stared at the radio as if it had grown fangs, a predator disguised in polished wood, waiting for the moment to strike. Mr. Summers, desperation creeping into his voice, unplugged the radio. Silence. Relief. And yet, from somewhere in the house, or perhaps somewhere inside his own mind, a faint whisper lingered, repeating softly, unmistakably, Harold, Eleanor, Martha. The names were alive, carrying a promise, a warning. The Summers family realized that the novelty of the radio had vanished. In its place, something ancient, patient, and malignant had taken hold, and it would not be ignored. Night settled over the house, but no one slept. Every tick of the clock echoed like the heartbeat of a hidden menace, and the family felt, with terrifying certainty, that they had become the audience of a broadcast that no one else could hear, and that once started, could never truly end. The next morning, the Summers family awoke to an ordinary dawn, sun filtering through the curtains, birds chirping outside. Yet the memory of last night clung to them like a persistent shadow, and the radio, sitting innocently on the side table, seemed to pulse with silent threat. Cautiously, Mr. Summers approached it, running his fingers along the polished wood as if testing whether it was truly inert. He flipped the switch. Static hissed, soft at first, like wind whispering through dry leaves. Then a faint melody emerged, a lullaby, familiar and sweet, the kind Eleanor had sung to herself as a child. Relief washed over the family, a temporary balm, until the lullaby warped, distorting into dissonant chords, and then the voice returned, "Harold, the field behind the mill." The words were slow, deliberate, almost conversational. Mr. Summers froze. That field was where he had intended to meet a supplier later that day. Panic knotted his stomach. Could the radio know? Was it some trick of coincidence, or had the box truly singled them out, predicting their actions with uncanny precision? Mrs. Summers reached for his arm, and the subtle tremor in her touch betrayed her own fear. Eleanor, once again wide-eyed, whispered, "It knows everything. It knows us." Her voice trembled, tiny and fragile, yet it resonated in the tension-saturated room. Mr. Summers tore his gaze from the radio and peered out the window. The field lay serene in morning sunlight, entirely unaware of the dread it now harbored in their minds. Throughout the day, the radio remained silent, but an unshakable sense of anticipation gripped the family. Every sound, footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a door, even the rustle of leaves outside, felt amplified, each one a potential signal of what the radio might announce next. By evening, unable to resist, Mr. Summers dared to turn the dial again. Static hissed, low and uneasy, and then came the voice, "Martha, by the stove." His wife's blood ran cold. She had been preparing dinner moments earlier, exactly at the stove. How could it know? The family gathered instinctively around her, a protective circle, yet a sense of futility pervaded. The radio had observed them, named them, and in doing so, had insinuated an inescapable dominion over their lives. The voice became faster, naming locations within the house, sometimes accompanied by chilling descriptions of imagined accidents. "Eleanor, top of the stairs, careful." Each warning, though seemingly preventative, carried a latent terror, as if predicting imminent doom while mocking their fragility. Shadows stretched along the walls with an unnatural fluidity, bending toward the radio as if feeding on its sinister energy. The living room became a stage for unseen manipulation, and every movement of the family was weighed, catalogued, assessed by a presence they could neither confront nor comprehend. Mr. Summers felt sweat bead along his temples, a creeping dread clawing at his rational mind. Nightfall arrived with oppressive stillness. The wind outside moaned like a chorus of distant voices, and the faint glow of street lamps cast elongated, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. The radio, now the silent heart of the house, pulsed faintly, as though alive, each flicker of static a heartbeat synchronized to their own. Eleanor shivered beside her mother, whispering, "It will tell us what will happen, and we cannot change it." Mr. Summers, staring at the polished wood box, understood the horrifying truth. The radio did not merely speak, it commanded attention, shaping reality with each uttered name and instruction. For the first time, the family felt completely exposed, as though some invisible hand had drawn back a curtain, revealing their lives as mere threads to be twisted at will by this unearthly broadcaster. As midnight approached, the radio crackled once more. The familiar hiss expanded, then the voice spoke clearly, its cadence deliberate and icy. "Harold, Eleanor, Martha, tonight." The family exchanged terrified glances. It was no longer a whisper of warning or curiosity. It was a summons. The room seemed to shrink, air heavy with the scent of ozone and faint smoke, as if the radio had inhaled the house itself. Outside, the world remained indifferent, oblivious to the creeping dread within the Summers home. Inside, their names echoed relentlessly, a promise and a threat intertwined. Midnight descended fully, and the house seemed suspended in a state between sleep and nightmare. The Summers family huddled together in the living room, hearts drumming against their chests, eyes flicking constantly toward the radio. Every small creak, every gust of wind against the windowpane, felt magnified, a harbinger of what was to come. Then, as if on cue, the radio crackled violently, spitting static like sparks from a fire, before the voice returned, sharper, more deliberate. "Harold, front steps, now!" Mr. Summers froze, his pulse hammering. Compelled by fear, yet tethered by disbelief, he stepped toward the door, each movement weighed down by a growing dread. The front steps lay just beyond the threshold, illuminated faintly by the flickering street lamp, and he could see nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the voice's insistence gnawed at his rationality. "Don't go," Mrs. Summers whispered, clutching his arm tightly, her nails digging into his sleeve. Her warning, desperate and trembling, did nothing to quell the pull that seemed to emanate from the radio itself. A low wind whispered through the cracks in the old wooden door, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, sharp and ominous. Harold hesitated, his hand trembling on the doorknob, but something unseen pressed against his mind, a subtle, irresistible force guiding his actions. With a deep breath, he stepped out, every footfall echoing unnaturally loud on the porch. The night was silent, yet the voice from inside the house continued, "Do not look back. Eleanor, Martha." Inside, Eleanor and Martha clung to each other, pale faces reflecting the flickering lamplight, their bodies tense with anticipation. The radio hissed, a low, serpentine sound threading through the living room, punctuated by faint, intermittent syllables, names, locations, warnings, all precise, all horrifyingly exact. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting as if alive, responding to the rhythm of the radio's pulse. Eleanor felt a prickle at the back of her neck and turned slightly toward the sound, only to glimpse, in the reflective surface of the radio, her own eyes staring back with a hollow, distant intensity, as though already separated from her body. Her breath caught in her throat, and she realized the voice did not merely predict, it reached into the present, bending reality to its will. Meanwhile, outside, Harold froze mid-step. A shadow passed over the porch, darker than the night itself, moving independently of the street lamp's flicker. The voice's command echoed, "Step forward, now." Against every instinct, against every scream of warning in his mind, he obeyed. The air thickened, dense and viscous, each inhale tasting of iron and ash, and the shadow loomed closer. Back inside, the family could hear the faintest of thuds, steps not belonging to any of them. A sense of inevitability filled the room. The radio static now carried something more, the measured breathing of unseen presences, slowly, deliberately pacing the edges of their awareness. Each whisper from the box seemed to carve reality, molding it into a maze where the family's movements and fears were known and anticipated. Suddenly, the front door creaked as if under tremendous weight. The shadows inside the house shivered and stretched toward it, joining in a silent, undulating wave. Eleanor whimpered, clutching her mother, while Martha's hands trembled over the edge of the sofa. The radio, still alive with static, now emitted a low, almost musical tone, a sinister cadence that seemed to sync with their heartbeats. Then came a single bone-chilling word, "Alone!" It reverberated through the house, the syllable dragging like a chain across the walls. The family realized with growing horror that the radio's influence was no longer confined to sound. It had begun to shape the very space around them, bending shadows, manipulating perception, and slowly isolating them from any sense of safety or normalcy. The night stretched on, every second a torment. Each whisper from the radio, each movement of the shadows, each flicker of the lamplight deepened the sense of inevitability. The Summers family had become actors in a broadcast that had been tuned not by choice, but by some ancient, relentless force. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat was anticipated, catalogued, and manipulated. And outside, in the silent night, Harold remained on the porch, trapped between fear and obedience, while the voice continued, patient and unyielding, promising that the story had only begun, and that no one inside the house would leave unmarked by the broadcast of the silent radio. By midnight, the house had transformed into a chamber of unease. The air hung heavy, each breath tasting of static and metallic tang, as if the radio had infused its very essence into the walls. Shadows writhed across the corners, stretching impossibly long, merging and separating like living entities. Eleanor clutched her mother's arm, her small fingers digging in with desperation, while Martha's eyes darted toward every creaking floorboard. Every whisper from the radio was precise, cutting through the tension. "Harold, do not look!" Eleanor, alone. It was no longer mere suggestion. Each word was a command, shaping their thoughts, bending them toward fear and paralysis. Harold, frozen on the porch, felt the cold night wind stiffen into a tangible grip, pressing against him, holding him in place. The radio's voice penetrated the walls, soft yet omnipresent. "Step back, or stay forever," his mind recoiled, wrestling between instinct and the unseen force compelling him forward. Inside, the family noticed the change. Objects seemed to shift subtly when they weren't looking, shadows thickened unnaturally, and the radio emitted a low hum that resonated through bone and sinew. Each member felt the creeping tendrils of dread that seeped from the box, reaching into their perception, warping time and space within the confines of their home. Suddenly, the front door shuddered, groaning under an invisible weight. The family gasped, instinctively retreating toward the center of the living room. Eleanor's eyes widened as she glimpsed a silhouette in the frosted glass, a figure tall and formless, standing just beyond the door. The radio's whisper escalated into a chorus of voices, overlapping, naming them one by one, detailing movements, habits, and even memories. Eleanor, the attic. Harold, the back hall. Martha, the kitchen. Each utterance carved the air, each syllable vibrating through the wood and floorboards, leaving an invisible mark that tethered the family to the radio's will. Martha, in a panic, lunged toward the box, attempting to shut it off, but her fingers brushed only the smooth, polished wood. It was unyielding, cold, as if fused with something ancient. The static swelled, growing into a cacophony of whispers, cries, and fragmented laughter. The lights flickered violently, revealing fleeting glimpses of pale faces behind the glass, twisted and distorted, mouthing words without sound. Eleanor shrieked as a shadow moved independently along the walls, detaching from its source and crawling toward her like a liquid darkness. Harold finally tore his gaze from the porch and rushed back inside, breathless, shouting for calm. But his words dissolved in the room as the radio pulsed in response, each flicker of its dial a heartbeat of some alien intelligence. It was as if the box was alive, assessing, reacting, and adapting. The room's dimensions seemed to stretch and compress unnaturally, corners appearing where none existed, hallways forming behind walls, shadows thickening into corridors of darkness. Eleanor stumbled backward, pressing herself into the embrace of her mother, both of them trembling uncontrollably. Then came the voice, clearer and more insistent than ever. "All alone! Come to me! The house is mine! Your names are mine!" The floorboards creaked as if responding to a weight that wasn't there, and the shadows extended toward the family, converging, enveloping. The radio emitted a low, continuous hum that resonated in their chests, syncing with their racing heartbeats. Every rational thought vanished. Fear consumed them entirely. The Summers family understood, in absolute certainty, that their home had become the epicenter of the radio's consciousness, a trap from which there was no easy escape. As the hum intensified, the lights dimmed completely, leaving only the glow of the radio, amber and pulsating, casting eerie reflections that seemed almost human. The whispering escalated into a chant, repeating their names over and over. Harold grasped his family's hands tightly, bracing for something inevitable, while outside, the wind moaned as though mourning what was to come. The house had become a prison, a broadcast of dread, and the Summers family were its unwilling audience, their fate poised on the precipice of terror, ready to descend into the final act orchestrated by the silent radio.